My name is Rachel Smith, and my project is titled Effects of Conferencing on Student Writing. My role within my study was the primary researcher. I was a long-term substitute in a classroom of 19 students. At the suburban public school I worked at, the third grade team consisted of 3 teachers. Each teacher had a homeroom and a specialty. They taught their specialty subject to all 3 third grade classrooms. My specialty was writing, so this made the most sense for me to focus my attention on. I chose to keep my study within my own classroom. My project all started as I noticed a need for a change within the setting of the writing classroom. Students were lacking stamina in writing. They simply showed no interest, and as a result, their quality of writing was failing. Some of this may be attributed to the increase in use of technology in recent years, especially after so many students stayed home to learn at some point during COVID, relying heavily on technology. Students may not see the value in writing by hand or using technology anymore. Again, with this low interest, students were losing the motivation to write altogether, and something needed to be done. From this came my research question: what happens to student quality of work in writing and their motivation when mini-conferencing is implemented in a third grade writing classroom? I began to collect background information through my literature review and the exploration of several subtopics. I evaluated how differentiation came into play during conferencing. As Geisler and colleagues noted, differentiated instruction involves the adjustment of content, instruction, and assessment to meet the needs of each individual in a heterogeneous classroom. By conferencing one-on-one, students they were given the opportunity to have their specific needs met through differentiation. I focused too on conferencing used as a way to goal set. Matt gives a good summary of explaining how tracking their own student progress allows for students to become aware of their own strengths and weaknesses, allowing them to set their own personal goals. From there, I looked at several articles related to giving feedback to students in the conferencing setting. Feedback can look different from one conversation to the next. Several forms of feedback were recognized within the literature, including feedback being provided to students by providing explanations, directing students in some way, and by providing correction. Additionally, just as there is no one purpose for conferencing, there is not necessarily one conference type that's ideal to all situations. One-on-one conferencing allows us the ability to utilize different types of conferencing to provide the feedback that's necessary and most beneficial to each individual. I then focused on researching the effects of conferencing on the quality of student work. I found that the research all pointed to the fact that performance can be increased through the isolated intervention of feedback on student performance. In addition, by looking at the effects conferencing had on student motivation, I found that increasing creative control and choice may increase student interest in writing, which was pointed out in the research conducted by Nolan. After conducting my own research, I was confident that my research could likely see some type of results that would help me to better understand and answer my research question. I decided that my interventions would be conferencing one-on-one with students in my homeroom class once a week for 5 to 10 minutes. Each day after my 20-minute writing mini lesson, I would use the remainder of the 60-minute total writing block to meet with individual students and give that 5 to 10 minutes of conferencing time. To collect data in my study, I used several different methods, allowing me to eventually triangulate the data that I had collected and best decide how the data helped me to answer my research question. I began my study with one method that didn't end up giving me the results I wanted and quickly adapted and changed my inquiry data collection. I had started with asking students informal questions during conferencing to check in on their perceived progress. However, I noticed that when prompted verbally, a lot of students would give me the same generic answer of things are going good and yeah, I get it. Instead, the self-assessments taken by students on paper created a wider variety of more thoughtful answers to specific questions. One way I evaluated and collected data was through formal and summative assessments. Students were given formative assessments 3 times and a summative once. These assessments used a scale to evaluate 6 different categories. This was my evaluation of student work. Students were also given self-assessments at 3 different points within the study. These assessments included 3 questions. The wording varied slightly to apply to where students were in the overall writing process. I also kept a conference tracking sheet so that I knew how many times I met with a student, but also what I use those 5 to 10 minutes of conferencing time for. The validity of my study was increased through the use of peer debriefing with my third grade team, triangulation of data in the forms of surveys, assessments, and observational tracking data, transferability, and ongoing investigations. To evaluate the data that I had collected on the formative and summative assessments, it's important to understand the scale used for the 6 items being evaluated. A 0 on the graph indicates that the skill was not evaluated. A 1 indicates that a student did not display that particular skill at the time. A 2 indicates that a student had begun to show evidence of a skill but has not yet mastered it, and a 3 showed that students mastered that skill. As demonstrated by the first graph and first question concerning organizing writing into paragraphs, 8 students demonstrated improvement from the beginning of the first conferencing session to the following 3 conferencing sessions. The other 11 students did not show a change in their ability to organize their writing into paragraphs. As demonstrated in Figure 2, in evaluating the student's ability to use facts, expert words and definitions, details, and observations about a topic, 12 students demonstrated improvement from prior to the first conferencing session to following 3 conferencing sessions. The other 7 students showed no change in their ability to use these elements in their writing. The third question demonstrates that 18 students showed improvement from before conferencing to after the conferencing sessions in their use of transitional words and phrases within their writing. Only 1 student experienced no change, and this student had already demonstrated the skill prior to conferencing. As demonstrated in the fourth question, 11 students improved on their capitalization of the correct words from before the first conferencing session to the following. The other 8 students did not show a change in their ability to demonstrate this skill. The third bar graph shows 15 students showing improvement in being able to correctly spell accountable words over the course of the study. The 4 students who did not show improvement in this skill were already able to successfully demonstrate the skill prior to conferencing. The sixth figure depicts the skill of using correct punctuation, showing 16 students improving from the first assessment to the summative assessment at the end of the study. There were 3 students who did not show improvement, but rather maintained the same level of mastery of the skill from the first to last. Students were also given self-assessments to complete at 3 different times throughout the study. One self-assessment was given prior to the beginning of the nonfiction unit and the commencement of conferencing. The second was given after some conferencing had already been implemented with each student. The final self-assessment was presented to students for completion after their nonfiction piece was completed. This data here shows that the student responses to the question, do you feel that you have areas in your writing that you can improve upon? This question was asked on all 3 self-assessments that were given. The pie graphs demonstrate an increase in the number of students who did not feel they had an area to improve upon in their writing. However, a majority of students maintained that there was at least one area that could be improved upon with their writing, demonstrating how conferencing can continue to be beneficial. These graphs represent student responses to the second question regarding conferencing on each of the self-assessments. On the first assessment prior to conferencing actually beginning, the question was worded as, do you think that conferencing with the teacher one-on-one at least one time a week would help you to make those improvements? On the following 2 assessments, after conferencing was being implemented, the wording for question 2 was, do you think that conferencing with the teacher one-on-one at least one time a week has helped you to make some improvements? The pie graph demonstrates that from the first to final assessment, there was an increase to 100% of students believing that conferencing with the teacher one-on-one was helpful in making improvements to their writing. After being asked to set a goal for themselves on their first self-assessment, students were asked if they believed they were making progress toward the goal on the second assessment. Their responses are shown in the graph. They were also asked to provide an explanation as to why they thought they were or were not making progress. This figure demonstrates that a majority of the class thought that progress toward their goal was being made. On the final self-assessment given at the conclusion of their writing of their nonfiction piece, students were asked, do you think that you achieved your writing goal? All but 1 student answered that yes, they had thought that they achieved their goal. This demonstrated an increase from the second assessment to the third of the number of students who believed they were on their way to achieving their goals or who had already achieved their goals. Again, the conference tracking log was used to collect basic observational data on what was being evaluated that day during conferencing. I just used this to make sure that I was meeting with every student. I also used abbreviations to quickly jot down what the focus of the conferencing session was, reteaching a mini lesson based on student goal or a mini lesson based on a teacher identified need. In conclusion, the results of this study demonstrate that conferencing one-on-one with students does increase their quality of writing. The study also demonstrated that motivation increased as well when one-on-one conferencing was implemented in the writing classroom. I have to admit that when I began this research study, I was afraid that it would be overwhelming to differentiate learning for 19 individual students within one subject area. However, I found that through tracking and collecting data in the forms of assessments, self-assessments, and my data log, it was completely manageable and worth it to see that all students improved in at least one or more areas of writing. It was also rewarding to see that this one-on-one time to work on their specific needs and identified goals helped to keep them motivated to continue their writing. One limitation of the study was that it only covered one specific unit of writing. In the future, I would recommend implementing the study over an entire school year so that different types of writing units, including fiction and nonfiction, could be evaluated. I plan to continue using conferencing in the future to provide differentiation to students and individually address their needs in hopes that they all have the best opportunity to improve their writing. It's way too easy for us as teachers to get wrapped up in teaching a lesson to an entire class of young writers and hoping that it resonates with all of them. As teachers, we would want to see the quality of their work improve, and by teaching all students the same thing in the same way, we would likely see some students improve, but what about the others? The ones who don't understand the content the first time it's taught, the ones who don't know how to apply the lesson to their own pieces, the ones who simply learn differently. It's way too easy for these students to slip through the cracks, likely causing them to lose the motivation to write altogether. By using one-on-one conferencing to address individual learning needs and goals, students are more likely to achieve a little bit of success, potentially motivating them to keep going. And as teachers, isn't